The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the hosts and guests, and not necessarily those of the staff or management of Worldwide Digital Broadcasting Corporation.
Hello, I am Andrea Gigline, and thank you for joining me for this episode of Serving Your Success. With me today is my co-host, Sharon Adashek, and as you know, if you've been listening to the show, Sharon was the producer of America's Most Wanted. She's a local entrepreneur in our beautiful community of Las Vegas. And most of all, why she's joined me with this is because she has a magnificently curious mind. Now, the other side really brings my heart an enormous amount of joy, because our guest today is the renowned researcher, Dr. Cortney Warren. And Cortney and I met because we were gym mates.
Yes.
Okay, so
yes.
Just so you know, there is a lot of physical going to be going on here. We had very detailed, but she has done such magnificent work in the field of eating disorders. Eating disorders. And what was so cool when I met her, she was winning awards early in her career as the best in the field. And that isn't why I just paid attention to you, but it told me that you were quite devoted to your work.
Very.
And why I've asked you to be on the show today is, yes, that part of your work is how we met, but there was a second phase of your life that had to do with a TED Talk you did and a book that you wrote all about lying. And it happens that Sharon was there the day you delivered that TED Talk. So amazing. I thought it would be a wonderful conversation to continue with our conversation about birthdays and life transitions and all those parts, because there are so many of our listeners who in fact are looking at their lives and wondering, is this where I really want to be? Is there something else? Is there something bigger? So Sharon, since you had the opportunity to actually hear Cortney do her TEDx talk, why don't you ask the $1 million question to start us off?
Why do people lie about their birthday?
Why do people lie about their birthday? Oh my goodness.
Yes.
You know, people lie about just about anything. Really anything. From your birthday to your age, to your weight, to what you ate, to how you feel today, to how your family's doing, etc., etc. Really anything. And the main reason people lie is that they can't admit the truth because it hurts too much. There's some degree of insecurity that bubbles up when we acknowledge something that's true that we don't want to be true. So when it comes to your birthday, it's usually because you wish you weren't getting older. Or, conversely, sometimes people use getting older to justify being unideal as people themselves. So for example, you might say, oh, I went to the gym today. I look pretty good for 65.
Now,
right?
do you find this is more with women or men?
Everyone. Because it's really about your ability to tolerate reality. And it really is about how empowered you are. Because the stronger you are, the less you have to give an explanation for the truth. The more you would just say, it's my birthday. And I just turned 39, personally, last month. And I am okay saying that because I actually think aging emotionally is the best thing ever. I would never go back.
And do you think that happens after a certain age? Do you think at 39 is okay, but 40 is not? Or at 40, 50, 60? Is there a certain age that it happens more? Or that, 21, no one's going to lie about 21.
So I think it really depends on the person. Because it's really about how do you feel about yourself in your life.
Don't you feel, though, people are proud, they're like, I'm 30. Like, some people want to be older.
Yes.
Or do you think that it's like, I'm 30, do you think that it's, there's a stigma that comes with it?
Let me interject differently from the work that I do in positive psychology. What I noticed, we had a guest on a segment by the name of Lacey Uroli, and she is somewhere in her mid-30s. And it was very clear, and it's my experience also with you, Cortney, as especially the 20 to 30 something, there has been enough years where there is an awareness that why would I lie about my age? Plus, we are living healthier longer. So we have a different perspective about what aging can look like. And yet there is that aspect of awareness. I think for my generation, I mean, I'm still kind of flawed. And I can remember
Welcome
countless.
to being human.
Yes. No, not flawed that way. No, not flawed like on the floor. When people would lie about their age. And I remembered one story going back in my history, honestly, about 30 years ago, when a woman I knew was married to a guy about 8 or 10 years younger than her, and I did not know that the man did not know that she was 8 or 10 years younger. And then she got breast cancer, and they're in the doctor's office, and the doctor made a comment that said, well, she was saying, how could this happen to me? Because she was a very healthy woman, non-smoker. And he said, well, statistically, you're kind of in that age group where you will see this. And he basically said what the group was, and the husband was sitting there not aware that his wife was in that age group. And
okay, that's an issue.
okay,
That's extreme.
okay,
That is extreme.
Slightly extreme.
okay,
That's
but
denial.
I have a lot of examples historically. I can't tell you them today because somewhere in the last 15 years, whenever the term cougar became in vogue.
Like kind of fun and happy
Okay,
and
so it
cool.
became more acceptable, but that was not the case. And so I do think that there are different stages we've gone through, but the
socially acceptable.
Yeah. And how we feel about it, I think you're representative, the 10 years that are between the two of you and the 20 some odd that are between me and you, it is really a difference of the experiences and how fortunate we've been that conversations have taken place. But another part of your topic in lying, particularly out of the TED Talk, was about relationships.
Yes.
So it's not just about lying about your age, but let's talk about that, because I know we have listeners that whether it's a business relationship or a love relationship, lying is a part of it.
Research suggests that we deliberately lie anywhere from 10 to 200 times a day.
A day? No.
A day. And that's
Really?
with intention. Yes, and they might be tiny, tiny little lies. But we didn't want to hurt your feelings, so I'm not going to really tell you how I feel.
Right.
Or
I know I do that a lot.
Right? I'm going to sort of leave this part out of my talk because I know you're not going to like it, so I'm just going to conveniently not tell you that part.
Right.
And we do it sometimes for very clear reasons. The more dangerous aspect of lying for me is self-deception, which I talk a lot about, which is the inability to tell the truth to yourself. And the problem with self-deception is that you can't tell someone else the truth if you can't admit it to yourself first. And so in that way, you will unknowingly pass lies on to everyone around you, everyone in your life. And that often manifests in really unhealthy relationship patterns. Sometimes they're passed on from generation to generation. Sometimes they infiltrate your romantic relationships in very key ways that are incredibly damaging, incredibly harmful. So inherent in our relationships is some negotiation of honesty, some negotiation of how much can I trust you to tolerate my reality? Can you handle it? Can you hear me? And if we set expectations for each other that we don't want the truth, people will honor them and they won't tell you the truth.
Correct.
And it's very hard to get close in that case.
One of the jokes that I love the most is that one where women had a tendency, I don't know if they still do, as that going to the man they love as they're getting dressed, or I've had girlfriends do it to me, do I look fat in this dress? I always wonder what would make you ask that question.
Right.
Like, there is no winning for losing on that question.
There's one reason people
Why?
ask that question.
They
Because they're
wanna-
insecure.
They're insecure.
Yes.
Yeah, they
That,
wanna
and,
get it.
and actually that reality, the insecurity, is
Yes.
what drives us to deceive ourselves, period. And it
Okay.
will manifest in our relationships with questions like, do I look fat in this? Or do you love me? Or do you miss me?
Yes.
Or didn't you want me to be there with you tonight? They're asking because they want some validation to make them feel better. But the truth is, there's no answer you could ever give to make them feel better.
Correct.
Because either you say, yes, that looks great on you, and they're like, they don't really think this looks, because it doesn't look great on
and
me.
I can't trust you because you won't tell me the truth.
Or they say, that looks terrible.
Yes.
And then they think, well, that doesn't make me feel better.
Yes.
Right? So
Yes,
those
yes,
are
yes.
questions that actually I would encourage people never to ask.
Never.
Never.
No.
Never.
How about, is this
Never.
flattering?
No. Is this flattering?
Is this my best?
If let's say you're trying on clothes, and you're actually asking for an opinion. You're not saying
with
it
your
because
best
you want to
friend,
feel better.
best girlfriend. What do you
Then
say?
ask.
Right.
It's all about the motivation for asking and the intention for asking, in my opinion. Because if I'm trying on something, if I'm shopping with Andrea and I say, what do you think of this? I definitely want her to tell me if it's not flattering.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
I'm not asking
But
because I want you to make me
see,
feel
and
better.
that's the difference. The term that you used about birthdays was you enjoy them because it's an emotional birthday, like you're growing emotionally with each year.
Yes.
And that to you is this magnificent gift
Yes.
of life. So I could not fathom being out shopping with you and you trying something on. Like, I know for a fact if I try something on, she is going to tell me, nah, not your best look.
Right.
I also have a thing that if I'm actually asking that question, that means I'm already doubting that it's the way, because I am not insecure about the way I look. I look the way I look. I'm pretty used to my thighs by now. My thighs and I are intimate. But so I don't ask that question, and I get curious. I get curious. If a salesperson is telling me something looks good and my little voice is saying no. Mm-hmm. So I know that.
Well, they're not going to be honest.
Correct. They
have
got a
ulterior
commission.
motives. They need
There is
some
a
money.
commission. And so there is that part, a vested interest. I used to have a joke, and I don't know if this works at your house. I know we're all married here. I could not expect my husband to tell the truth if he wanted to have sex in the same 24-hour period.
Exactly.
Okay?
It's not gonna
Is
happen.
this not true?
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. That's
Richard?
Yes. The man just doesn't have the capacity to do it. He wants to be clear enough that it's going to be he's going to get to yes.
You're a sure thing.
Yes, I'm a sure thing. Yeah. And so I learned that about him very early on. And I didn't hold it against him. I just knew not to take whatever, if he was being super nice and/or was saying yes to things that normally I don't think there would have been a yes to, maybe there was an ulterior motive.
Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Now, do you have a question?
I
you'd
have a
like to ask?
question.
Okay.
So, what do you consider your biggest revelation in this research? Is that we lie so much, or that it's deception, self-deception?
My motivation for writing this book on self-deception comes from being a psychotherapist. It comes from being a clinical psychologist. And it's because Andrea asked me, when I agreed to give the TED Talk, if I was going to tell the public something about psychology, what would I tell them and why? And although my research is all in body image and eating pathology, and I have a large degree of expertise in severe mental illness, if I was talking to the public, I would actually want to talk to them about how to live their best life, how to be most fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And as a therapist and as a human, the biggest reason people don't live their ideal life or don't evolve in the ways they want to is that they can't admit reality. Mm-hmm. And it keeps them stuck. Mm-hmm. And at some point, reality will hit them in the face to the degree that they will fall on the floor and they'll end up in my office. And at some point, most of us come to a moment in life where we are brought to our knees with the truth that is so painful and so hard and so obvious that we can no longer avoid it. Right. And that is why I think self-deception is such an important thing to discuss and a construct that we need to understand, because the more honest you are, the more empowered you are to make choices with your life that leave you with the least amount of regret. Mm-hmm. And that is actually the beauty of psychology for the public. Right. That is the beauty of our field as applied to real life, because this isn't a topic. Correct. Psychology is human nature. Correct. This isn't a topic that's meant to be studied in a lab. Mm-hmm. Right. This is a topic that should meaningfully affect the way you live your life. Right. And that is why self-deception is such a big topic.
And I think when you think about the first don't die principle, shift your awareness and a perspective will shift. It is all about not denying realities, but in fact being able to recraft them in a way that allows you to move forward. So where you are skilled in where this pathology comes from, and I believe that's what your TED Talk really gives us.
Yes.
And very beautifully, you give really great examples, and I would urge everyone to go and look up Cortney's name, Dr. Cortney Warren. The TED Talk was in 2014 at TEDx UNLV. It really goes through the various pathologies of how we do that. And so I will say that your work is identical to mine, but from the viewpoint of what is the pathology behind it. Mine starts at where is the path to get beyond it. And so it's very much aligned. And why it resonates so well with me, because the whole topic of lying, when she posed the question, I knew what her background was. I had a superstar sitting in front of me with this incredible pedigree in eating disorder and you'll have to say what the exact award was, but I remembered one that I was pretty impressed with was the APA, one of the youngest research awards.
Yes, I won 3 early career awards.
Right.
Wow.
From the American Psychological Association, who also very gratefully paid my graduate education. So
Yeah.
I was very lucky all
Yeah.
around.
So I knew that about her, and yet there was this greater body of work that I felt she was stepping into or about to step into. And that's where I'd like to transition this conversation right now, because so much about our conversation with Sharon the day we did that episode, and using birthdays as a goal-setting attribute and how to set it up as a very positive transitional
Very positive.
point in life. There comes a point, no matter how great the work you're doing is, that you may be called to a transition.
Yes.
So
Yes.
talk to us about your particular experience with that.
Well, the most obvious is that I spent my entire life and professional career getting a doctorate in clinical psychology, getting a tenure-track job, and getting tenure at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, which is what you're supposed to do as a professor, right?
And when your mother is a PhD
Yes.
and your father is a PhD,
Yes.
Thanksgiving at her house had always had to be really interesting.
It was certainly interesting. I have 2 professors as parents. And then I had my first child. I had a little girl, Isabella. And I went back to work, and I left her right after she woke up in the morning, and then I got home right before she went to bed at night. And I had to really look in the mirror and say, is this the life that I want to live? Am I going to regret not publishing another 50 research articles in the next 5 years? Or am I going to regret that I missed her entire early childhood before she actually has a life of her own? The answer was very obvious. It was not hard. The hard part was actually admitting to myself that everything I had done up until this point, I was letting go of for a new priority. And that was incredibly scary, because it confronted me with every kind of identity-based question I could have. So who am I? What am I doing? Why did I spend all my time getting here? Am I just going to be a mom now? What does it mean to be a mom? Am I really a mom? I've only been at this for 6 months. So I don't really know
there's
what
no
this role
credentials
is.
that you
It's
got
not like
without-
I
yeah.
have this figured out.
Right.
And the bottom line is that no matter how well you know yourself, the world will always give you new opportunities.
Especially with
Always.
children.
Always. Always.
Right.
And you can't predict what's going to happen. So the best you can do is be honest with yourself each moment of each day of your life and make choices based on the information that you have at the time. And then when you realize that your choice changes, you have to change.
Right. And I think that's what our listeners are listening for the most from what I've heard from the responses that I've gotten from them. They are in points of transition, whether even if they're at the job that they think they're supposed to be doing right now, there is this feeling that there is something else. And it really came from our first discussions with, how do I use each year? Like, you don't have to have a decade birthday, to make it some big thing. But how do you set aside time to reevaluate, is this what I want to be doing, and then get honest with it? Is it just the paycheck? Because I know you had to face that.
Yes,
being
multiple
a producer
times.
for America's
Yes.
Most Wanted.
To going to a housewife to a new city and becoming a mom, and I loved being a mom, but I really missed working, and I really missed being part of, making my own money, and being in the community, and where do I fit in now? So I think as women, our reality in our everyday life shifts on a day-to-day basis. But I think also a lot of women in that 30, 40-year decades, also they're a mother, but then they really miss that work. I mean, do you see yourself going back to this? Going back to being...
I don't see myself going back to academia, but I absolutely still have a career.
Do you still practice?
Oh, yeah.
No. Although
You
I
don't see private
I don't see
clients.
clients
You
right
don't
now.
see clients,
No,
okay.
I now have a son as well, who's just turned a year
She's been
old.
busy.
You're very busy.
Yes. So
But you've also been busy doing an incredible film that's
yes,
talk to us about that.
a documentary called Denial, and I speak a lot. So I'm still doing a lot of public speaking and a lot of kind of public psychology. I write a blog for Psychology Today, and I interact with the public on a much more regular basis
using
than I
your
ever
brain.
did. Certainly, and I
and-
do need that.
Yeah.
I do.
Yes.
Absolutely. I would not give up my professional identity. It just had to shift.
Correct.
I couldn't work 80 hours a week
Right.
anymore.
Right.
It just
and I
wasn't
think that
feasible.
you're doing the work today in a way that was the way you said a few minutes ago, where you wanted to help people live better lives.
Yes.
Research is written for a very small community of
Yes.
people who care about that topic in that it is a very myopic community
It
of
is.
who cares about that work. Once you're able to translate the work to the general public is when it actually begins to have a different impact. And that was the cornerstone, I think, of what attracted me to positive psychology, that there were these incredible minds who were coming forward and saying, and Marty Seligman was very clear in our initial trainings, his goal was to have therapists learn this work so that it got to the people quicker, because the research he had been doing up until that point was really within, he and all of the men and women that worked with him got enormous recognition for the work that they did, but it was within their community.
Of course.
Now, there is no community that is not touched by the work that they've been doing, and I think that was one of the transitions, the calling for yourself.
Absolutely. Who is reading my peer-reviewed journal articles?
Right.
Other PhDs,
Right.
other MDs.
Right.
It wasn't reaching the public, certainly, unless I wrote a blog
Right.
that was aimed at the public, or unless I give a TED Talk, or unless I do some sort of more public speaking, so that they can actually integrate the information into their own life. And that is very important. It's very rewarding.
Right.
So now being a mom, how has your information about, self-deception and is the Easter Bunny going to show up at your house and Santa Claus, or is that...
Such a good question. You know what? Not yet. And my daughter is going to be 4 next week, and we talk about Santa, and we talk about the Easter Bunny, and we talk about any of these sort of cultural
Fairy.
Right.
norms. But I have never told her that that's who brings you presents.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
you haven't.
Interesting.
So it's just a character
It's
related
just a
to the
character.
holiday.
Now, I think that's
brings
a
the
much
present?
bigger question, probably, for us to think about as a culture, because I do think cultural norms are interesting, and I'm not going to go out on a limb and say you should tell your kids that these things
Oh wait,
don't exist.
I had a professor in
But-
graduate school actually say that he thought it was the most he never had children. He thought it was so disgusting that parents allowed their children to believe about this. So where do the presents come from?
They come from us and people who love them.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you know what? We actually
think
are a
that's
little
pretty easy.
non-traditional also,
Yes.
because we kind of don't believe that holidays should be the time you give gifts.
Right.
So we are much more on the plan of when you see something that you think somebody you love will love, then you
Right,
give
you
it to
give it,
them.
right.
And it doesn't have to be on their actual birthday or on Christmas or on any other holiday. It can just be when you feel like it. So my husband and I actually don't really give our kids gifts on the holidays, but they get tons from other
Right,
people in our
grandparents,
lives, which
aunts
is
and
fine,
uncles, right.
totally fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there isn't like a Santa came last night.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
And the tooth fairy hasn't come up
Hasn't
yet.
she's just going to turn 4, so we still have all our baby teeth.
Okay.
We haven't had that experience yet. We'll
Okay.
see. That'll be
Yeah.
an interesting one to talk about.
Yes.
take us back for a moment towards the end of your TED Talk when you announced publicly for the first time the transition, that all this awareness and the concept of being truthful to yourself.
Yes.
Take us to that part.
Oh my gosh. So I announced at the end of my TED Talk that I was resigning after getting tenure. And I think it shocked the psychology realm. It shocked my department, certainly, although all of the members in my department
Had you given them a letter?
I
Oh,
did.
they did.
Yes,
Okay,
I told
okay.
all of them.
I was
so it
just
wasn't a
wondering if that
surprise.
was the first time they heard about it.
No, they knew. And
Yes.
I stayed at UNLV for a full year because unlike some jobs, you can't just give your 2 weeks notice when you're in a full faculty position. I had to close my lab. I
Right.
had graduate students who I still work with.
Right.
But it was shocking to people. I mean, they kind of couldn't wrap their heads around it, which I really understand because you do work your whole life to get there. I really get
Sure.
it. And in psychology, in this field of psychology, my colleagues at the American Psychological Association and my eating disorder groups were completely shocked.
Wow.
Because you don't usually
Work
become
so
really
hard.
successful and win all the early career awards and sort of lead the way to a new field of study, and then say, I'm actually not going to do this anymore. But this really surprising thing to me was that over time, after people digested it, the number of messages that I got from people saying, I wish I had done it.
Right.
I am amazed at your courage. I am so grateful that you're following your dreams. It was astounding to me, even from some of the most senior emeritus faculty members that I have worked with and who have mentored me over the years.
Right.
I don't think there was anyone who was unsupported.
Great.
Really, they were
Yep.
just surprised.
Super. Well, there is something that's come into my mind just in the last few days, and I haven't shared this with you, Sharon, but it was because I'm in a lot of conversations with millennials and boomers and all the things that are going on. And one of the conversations that came up is that millennials are being identified as these entrepreneurial people who don't want to stay in any one thing too long. They want a lot of movement. And it came to me over the last, I'd say 48 hours, that when I think back 30, 40 years, as women became part of the economic workforce in force, that was actually one of the first major shifts of when we actually were moving around more. We actually started the conversation that one job for life was not what our lives did not permit that.
Right.
If we wanted to have a multidimensional life, that we did. And that only now it is spread to both the young men and the young women of this generation. Is that something that strikes with either one of you? It was just a thought that honestly just came into my head.
I don't think it's the kind of situation anymore. We live in that society where you get a job with a corporation and you get a watch when you're there
Yeah,
50
no watches.
years. No watches.
No watches.
So
No pensions, no
basically,
watches.
No watches, right. And I think it's just as, that's how our society is now. I think people are with a job for a certain amount of time. The attention span is much shorter and they move on.
Right.
And
One of the worries I have for the millennials, which may somewhat relate to this, is that as creative and interested and sort of more worldly as they are certainly than my generation and probably any older generations were, I think some lack the awareness that it takes a ton of work to
Correct.
get somewhere
Correct.
big. And I see kind of this, you can do this, and those things are true, but it's without the kind of chutzpah of this is going to take a great deal of effort to be successful.
Or the grounding that positive psychology gives, where you actually look at your values and say, what are the things that bring me the greatest satisfaction when I'm doing? There isn't a lot of self-examination. I'll tell you where, part of this came for me was the fact that I had been approached by someone. There is an institute called the Kauffman Foundation that did a study that said that the millennials have the conversation that they're the entrepreneurial ones, but the truth is they don't have the money to start the businesses, and that they desperately need to merge with the boomers who still hold the bulk of wealth, with the exception of internet wealth that younger people may have glommed onto in some very select versus the whole population.
i.e. their parents.
And there's a lot of deception in there.
Yes.
If I start a business, it's going to be successful.
Oh, I know.
All I need is a good idea.
Right.
Oh my gosh, the
Or an
number
app.
of
I need an app.
deceptive
There's an app.
lies in there are massive. I see it in
Yeah.
businesses constantly, and
Yeah.
certainly in younger entrepreneurs who think, well, I'll start a business. I can work at home and sleep in my pajamas all day. And
Right.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Good luck.
Well, I think that's, these YouTubers, it was on 60 Minutes the other day. These kids are going on YouTube and making, using products and putting it on YouTube, and they get $300,000.
Yes.
I mean, it used to be that it was a web designer or internet
Correct.
or an app. Now it's YouTube
Yes.
and endorsements. That's
Well,
where it's.
definitely we are in this incredible flux, and I think that's where your work in being aware
Awareness.
and not lying to
Yes.
ourselves what it
Yes.
really is
Yes.
will help us all move forward. Now, Courtney, this has been absolutely incredible. There is another topic that you mentioned your blog in Psychology Today,
Yes.
that I would like to invite you back to do another segment on, and it's on the concept of luck.
Great.
And I think it feeds into the tail end of this conversation where, we have major transitions in life, we set goals, but then there's other aspects that come into play. And for the younger in particular, what is that concept? So I want to invite you back soon to do another segment on just that topic. But for now, I want to leave everyone with this thought. We have come together to talk about how do we lie to ourselves by one of the most renowned experts and someone who can articulate the message as well as it needs to be, Dr. Cortney Warren. And I hope that you have seen how between the transitions you make in life and how you are willing to face where you are in life, you actually have the power to build forward some of the next best phases of your life. So this is Andrea Gigline. If you'd like to write me, ask a question, drsuccess@servingsuccess.com, and the information is on the screen. We will also have the information on how you can see the TED Talk, how you can get in touch with Dr. Warren, and of course on Amazon you can find her book. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Humans are masters of self-deception. We fool ourselves into believing things that are false, and we refuse to believe things that are true. I was in graduate school when I really started delving into the topic of self-deception, and it rocked my world. I saw it everywhere, in everyone. We lie to ourselves about the smallest details, such as how much we really ate today, and why we didn't list our actual height and weight on our driver's license. We lie to reflect our aspirational goals. I'll only have one glass of wine tonight, when I know that I'm drinking at least 3. We lie to uphold social ideals. I never have sexual thoughts about anyone except my spouse, because that wouldn't be acceptable. We lie about our most important life choices, such as why we married who we did or chose a given career path. Unfortunately, for all the romantics out there, love is rarely the full motivation for those choices. Nowhere was self-deception more obvious than in my romantic relationships. I was terrified of being left. My fear of abandonment led me to act in ways that are still hard for me to admit. Anxiously awaiting a phone call, driving to see if he was where he said he would be, asking him repeatedly if he loved me. At the time, I couldn't have told you any of that because I wouldn't have been able to admit it to myself. At the core, we lie to ourselves because we don't have enough psychological strength to admit the truth and deal with the consequences that will follow. That said, understanding our self-deception is the most effective way to live a fulfilling life. For when we admit who we really are, we have the opportunity to change. It's hard to look at this photo and think, liars. But our self-deceptive tendencies start here. From a very early age, we start observing and making conclusions about ourselves and our environment. Right or wrong, the conclusions we made affected our identity. As adults, we will most want to lie about how psychologically painful realities experienced as children affected who we are today. Perhaps you were raised in a single-parent home in which you were neglected by your father. You learned that something was wrong with you. You weren't smart enough, attractive enough, athletic enough. You concluded that to make people love you, you needed to be perfect. As an adult, when someone points out your imperfections, you feel tremendous anxiety, but deny where it comes from. Perhaps you felt ugly as a child because you were teased for your appearance. You learned to eat in response to emotional pain. As an adult, you struggle to maintain a stable weight because your eating has very little to do with hunger. Perhaps you watched your parents fight. You learned to avoid conflict. Now, you struggle to admit even feeling negative emotion. Although each of our specific childhood learnings will be unique, what we learned will be exemplified in the lies we tell ourselves as adults. Psychological theories of human nature can help us understand our self-deception. Sigmund Freud first described lying through ego defense mechanisms, psychological strategies that protect our egos, our core sense of self, from information that would hurt us. Denial, refusing to believe that something is true, even though it is. I don't have a problem with alcohol, even though I drink every day. I'm not jealous, even though I secretly check my partner's email. Rationalization, creating a reason to excuse ourselves. I wouldn't have yelled at you if you hadn't treated me so unfairly, thereby justifying my yelling. I know that smoking isn't good for my health, but it helps me relax, thereby justifying my smoking. Projection, taking an undesirable aspect of ourselves and ascribing it to someone else. I'm not like that, you're like that. When dating someone you've lost interest in, you say things like, you're not ready for this relationship. When in fact, you're not ready for this relationship and never will be. Pioneers in the cognitive behavioral realms describe how our thoughts deceive us through cognitive distortions, irrational ways we think. Polarized thinking, thinking in extremes. I will either eat no cookies or an entire box. Because if I eat one cookie, I've already blown my diet, so I might as well keep eating. Emotional reasoning, thinking that our feelings accurately reflect reality. I feel hurt, so you must have done something bad to me. I feel stupid, consequently I am stupid. Overgeneralization, taking a single negative event as an infinite spiral of defeat. After going through a bad breakup, you think, I'm always going to be alone. After getting denied a promotion at work, you think, I'm never going to be successful in my career. From an existential perspective, we deceive ourselves to avoid the givens of life, the fundamental realities of being human that we must face. Death, we're all going to die. Ultimate aloneness. We were born as a single person housed in a solitary physical body. Meaninglessness. Our lives are inherently meaningless unless we give them meaning. And freedom. We are responsible for ourselves because we have the freedom of choice. To avoid confronting these realities, we frequently lie to ourselves. I am this way because of my upbringing, thereby deferring responsibility for my choices. The bad things on the news, they would never happen to me because I'm somehow special and uniquely protected from harm. I'm not going to write a will. I'm young, I'm not going to die anyway, thereby denying my mortality. Multicultural and feminist psychologists describe how internalization of cultural norms affects us. Here, we deceive ourselves by believing what we were culturally conditioned to believe is true, instead of deciding what we actually believe is true. Do you compromise yourself to meet cultural norms? Do you think you need to look a certain way, be a certain weight, earn a certain income, get married, have children, be religious, because you're supposed to? Or because you believe that it's right for you? All of these theories of human nature help us understand how we deceive ourselves on a daily basis. Why should you care? Self-deception leads to massive amounts of pain and regret. To avoid being honest, we frequently make choices with harmful consequences to ourselves and others. We may use drugs, alcohol, eat, shop, gamble, steal, lie, leave people, or pass our emotional baggage down to those we love the most. Or we may choose not to change, even when we're miserable or causing profound harm to those around us. Looking back at life with regret is incredibly painful because you can't change your choices in the past. As I shared earlier, I struggled greatly in my romantic relationships. I knew that I didn't feel safe, but I believed it was my boyfriend's fault. If he just called me more, told me he loved me more, then I would feel safe. The truth was, there was nothing he could do to make me feel safe, because my feelings had nothing to do with him. The reason I didn't feel safe is that I learned as a child that people would always leave me. And I lived my life making choices consistent with that belief. When we don't take full responsibility for who we are, we hurt ourselves and everyone around us. Now what? How do we start acknowledging the lies we tell ourselves? How do we start becoming more honest liars? The first step is self-awareness. We become observers of ourselves. When you have a strong emotional reaction to something, pause. When what you say doesn't match how you act, pause. When you're thinking irrational thoughts, pause. Ask yourself, what does this say about me? Similarly, most of us spend a tremendous amount of energy trying to get over someone or something that happened to us. And we generally avoid examining our contribution to conflict in our lives. When you're unresolved about something or someone, pause. Ask yourself, what does my reaction to this situation say about me? As we become more honest and aware, we also become more responsible for our choices. If we admit that we're insecure about something, which we all are, we're now confronted with a choice to work on our insecurity or not. Whatever we decide, we are now more responsible for the consequences of our insecurity because we know better. Not changing when confronted with the truth is a choice. Although we can't control many circumstances we encounter in life, we are responsible for our reactions to all of them. In that vein, one of the best ways to confront our self-deception is psychotherapy. It is probably the only relationship that you will ever have in your entire life that exists solely to benefit you. Yet a great deal of stigma exists around therapy. People frequently say things like, I don't need therapy. Therapy's only for crazy or weak people who can't help themselves. The truth is, it takes tremendous courage to be completely vulnerable to another human being. Therapy is truly a gift if you're courageous enough to accept it. Confronting our self-deception is a lifelong journey. We change, and the world offers us new opportunities to understand ourselves. There is always more to learn. I was on the perfect path to be a successful academic. I received tenure here at UNLV 2 years ago, and in about 6 weeks, I will be unemployed because I resigned. Getting tenure and then quitting is about the last thing that anyone would expect from a faculty member, especially me. I love psychology. I love teaching. I love research. I love my department. I had an amazing experience at UNLV. But the truth is, my passion isn't in academia anymore. To admit that to myself was brutally painful because I had to confront all of my self-deceptive tendencies and insecurities. What if I disappoint people? What will my family say? What am I going to do? What if I can't support myself? Who am I if I'm not a professor? What if my whole life changes? What if my whole life doesn't change? If I had chosen to stay in academia, I would have paid a huge psychological price. I would have to admit that I was not strong enough to make different choices for myself when confronted with the truth. Be more honest, liars. Choose to become more honest about the lies you tell yourself. Use the truth to live the most fulfilling life for you, because you've only got one.